everybody, I'm Kelly.
And I'm Beth.
And welcome to Everything Under the Sun. And today we've got a special guest with us, Pete Garcia, and we're going to get to our conversation in just a moment. But first, just wanted to remind you all, if you're joining us on YouTube, to be sure to hit the subscribe and notification button so that you get our weekly podcasts downloaded. And then if you're following and listening to us on Apple or Spotify, be sure to follow along and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us out and gets our content out. So we appreciate to all of our new listeners that we've gotten this week. We just want to say hello and welcome, and we really appreciate it. So Pete, glad to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into teaching Bible prophecy in this space.
Well, this would be like an hour, so I'm going to summarize this down into like 5 minutes. So I grew up in church, great Christian parents. By the time I graduated high school, though, I was really struggling with this idea of sinning and then keeping my salvation. So eternal security was this huge issue that I had back then, and I didn't understand all the differences between grace and mercy and eternal security of the believer and all that stuff. So I think from about 92 on, I drifted for about 15 years. So I had already graduated high school, or I just graduated high school, joined the Army, got out of the Army, had been in Europe for a few years, came back, went to college with the full intention of going into the Air Force. When I was in the Air Force ROTC for about 2 seconds, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. This was 1997. So at the time, I went to a big state university. And so these are pretty big programs. They had the Air Force and the Army ROTC. I think each of those programs had about 200 cadets in each. And I think I was probably one of maybe 3 or 4 out of both programs that had already served. Like back then, it wasn't common for prior enlisted to get out, go back to college, and go into ROTC. At least it wasn't where I was at. So, so I ended up going to the Army ROTC and graduating right after 9/11. So 9/11 happened in September. I graduated that May, commissioned as a medical service corps officer. And then from there, I went into the flight school program for medevac. And I basically flew for the next, 20 years. So from May of 2002 on, I was active duty, deployed to Iraq in 2005, 2006, and then Afghanistan 2008, and then 2013. And then in 2017, I was stationed in Saudi Arabia. And then I was in Korea before that. So I'd been kind of all over the place. In 2007, I was in the 101st Airborne, and I just come back from Iraq, and we were getting ready to go to Afghanistan in the that January, like the very beginning of January of 2008. And I'm sitting in a church in Clarksville, Tennessee, a Baptist church. And I call it my come to Jesus moment, because I'm sitting I'm really, at this point in my life, I'm really only going to church every once in a blue moon, just to call back and tell my mom, hey, I went to church, I'm not a complete reprobate. And so I'm in church.
So what church did you grow up in? Was it a Baptist church or was it?
Southern Baptist, yeah.
Okay.
So I had a good upbringing. It all atrophied over 15 years. And by the time this point in my life, I couldn't quote anything out of the Bible. John 3:16 maybe. And I kind of I knew Noah and was in Genesis, and I knew like real basic stuff. But I'm sitting in church, and there's nobody in front of me, nobody behind me in the rows. This is like the third service. It's a pretty large church. They're running about 900 people there on a Sunday. So they have 3 services. I'm in the last service. I'm in the very back of the church. Wow. And they have the lights down because they've got people up on stage giving testimonies about something. I just remember sitting there, and this is right before iPhones came out. So I had my little flip Nokia phone, and you can't really do a whole lot on it. Back then, you had that one little snake game on there. That was basically it,
Right.
So I'm just like, oh, I'm hungover. I'm just like not feeling it. And I'm like, of all the days I come, this is like the day I come. And
Mm,
uh, I just remember hearing a voice, clear as
mm,
day. I mean, I'm sitting there, nobody's around me by rows, and three clear words hit me. I mean, like somebody said it to me in my ear. So I turned to look to see who it was, and there wasn't anybody there. So I'm like looking around the seats, and I'm kind of like checking under the seats and looking for
mhm,
speakers or so. I thought somebody was pranking me.
mhm,
It wasn't anything. And I was like, well, that was super weird. And then
mhm,
so I just remember praying at that time. And at this point in my life, I knew enough to know that, God's not the only one that can speak to people. I mean, obviously Satan can as well.
mhm,
And so I'm like, all right, God, if this is from you, I need to verify this, trust but verify kind of thing. So I just said, if this is from you, and the first thing I popped into my head was the pastor. I like have the pastor call me this week. And that guy didn't know me from Adam. I mean, I could walk right past him in Walmart. He wouldn't know who I was. So
mm,
he had never called me before either. So nobody from the church had called me. So this was, and I did submit a visitor card months and months earlier, like 6 months earlier, 5 months earlier,
wow.
that I had even forgotten about at that point.
Mhm,
Nobody called, and so anyway, so that was Sunday, and then on Wednesday at noon, I'm on the flight line, got helicopters going, running up, and I'm checking on something, and it was right at noon, and my phone rang. I felt my phone buzzing in my pocket, so I pull out my phone. I'm looking at it. I don't know the number, so I'm like, "Hello," and he goes, "Hey, this is Pastor. I forget the guy's name now, so and so from the church here in Clarksville." And my jaw was on the floor because it hit me like what I had asked God. I was like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
okay." So that means
mhm,
something, and I'm telling this
mhm,
pastor about it, and he probably was regretting calling me. But anyways, that got me set on a trajectory, if I can put it that way.
mhm,
And the next month, my best friend commits suicide. 2 months
mhm,
after that, I get married, and like a week after that, I go to Afghanistan. So I mean, it was like just a whirlwind. My life was completely in disarray.
mhm.
Yeah, from that point forward, I just remember praying to God. I just remember asking him. I was like, "All right, God, you have my attention." I hate reading the Bible. It's not that I hated the Bible, I just hated reading it because I wasn't a good student and I wasn't I got bored reading, things, especially books I didn't really care about. But like the Bible, I always get like my eyes would get heavy and I didn't understand what I was reading. I was like,
Mhm,
oh God, give me a hunger for your word, first of all. I want
mhm.
to be hungry to read it. And then secondly, give me understanding because I don't know what I'm reading. That was the two
Right.
things I asked for. And
Mhm,
somewhere in that process between Texas and Kentucky and Afghanistan, I got the Chuck Missler's book, Learn the Bible in 24 Hours. And I didn't buy it. I don't even know how I came across the book I can't remember how I got a hold of it. I either found
wow.
it or I found it in a church library in Afghanistan, like the little book libraries, or I found it on a bus, or again, I don't remember how I got the book, but I got it somehow. And it just like opened the Bible in a completely new way and it made sense. Like it made everything make sense. Like, how each book of the Bible connects with every other book of the Bible. And
Mhm,
just because of those things, and many of these authors were separated by hundreds of years, separated by thousands of miles. They didn't know each other, yet they're all telling the same story of the same God because it's God, the Holy Spirit, that's orchestrating the writing of this. So it just shows the supernatural nature of the Bible and it just lit a fire under me. I don't know how to explain it any other way than that. And from the moment I got back to Texas, or when I got back from Afghanistan and then went to, as soon as we were there, we got moved to San Antonio. I mean, I was reading my Bible, hours and hours and hours a day, just devouring it every day for like 2 or 3 years.
mm,
It just stuck. I don't know how to explain it. Just like I can remember things now, and at this point, I'm getting a lot of knowledge, but I don't have anywhere to serve because when I got married, I married into the Church of Christ, and they're amillennial,
mm,
uh, Calvinistic, and all these other kind of traditional Protestant, Reformed Protestant kind of things that they don't. In other words, they don't focus on Bible prophecy at all. I mean, it's
mhm,
like
Mhm.
taboo. So I'm learning all this stuff, and I'm learning all this really cool stuff about scripture and about not just prophecy, but when you study Bible prophecy, I mean, so prophecy or eschatology is one doctrine out of, dozens of doctrines in the Bible, right? When you think about a particular grouping of a subject, right? And
Mhm.
what does the Bible have to say about Christ, or what does the Bible have to say about the church, or what does the Bible have to say about Israel, or salvation, or sin, or on and on. And so the prophecy is one of many, but it makes up like 30% of your Bible. And it's
Right.
spread out through the Bible in such a way that it's in almost every book.
Yeah.
And I mean, the only two books I can think of off the top of my head, that don't really have anything prophetic is like Third John and maybe Philemon. But other than that, I mean, there's prophecy or there's prophetic types, connections, patterns, etc., that you find everywhere else. And when you study eschatology, you end up studying every other doctrine because Bible prophecy will take you through the whole Bible. And in order for your eschatology, what position you hold, whether it's pre-trib, mid-trib, pre-wrath, post-trib, any of those positions, you have
Mhm.
to make that position line up with all the rest of your doctrines, or
Right.
else you're going to come into some like cognitive dissonance where you're like, that, how can this be true if this is not true?
That's
Right.
right.
The only one that I found, and I was kind of I was going pre-wrath initially because I'm coming back into this completely fresh
Right.
age of 33. I didn't know hardly anything about the Bible. Now, Chuck Missler was pre-trib, but he didn't convince me of that in the Bible because I was still reading other places online and other authors that were pre-wrath I thought made pretty compelling cases. So
Had you ever read any of the Left Behind books, like when they were popular? Did that ever influence you in any way, or?
I think I read them in the 90s. At least I read the initial series because my youth pastor, right before I graduated high school, was really into Bible prophecy. He had just got in the Marine Corps and he was real fired up and but to me the Left Behind series, and even to this day, it's hard to write a fictional series about a time that's coming that is going to be
Mhm.
so absolutely horrific that you can't
Yeah.
even really describe it in the book, or else your book's going to be rated R or mature or something,
Right.
or X-rated. You're not going to be able to sell it to anybody because
Mhm.
so they have to kind of Disneyfy it, to make it
Yeah.
palatable to a 7 year
I
old.
just remember, like, for
Mhm.
me, that was kind of my first, like, taste of eschatology, and the premise actually made sense to me. So I kind of went that route into pre-trib, you know, dispensationalist and all
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering.
Yeah, I think I guess when I got back into it after the first couple of years of my come to Jesus moment, so about 2008, 2009, I was still on the fence on pre-trib. I was kind of leaning that direction, but I was also looking at pre-wrath pretty heavily. And yeah, from there, I was trying to find somewhere to serve, and I couldn't serve in the church because, obviously we had major doctrinal disagreements on
Right.
not just eschatology, but baptism and other stuff.
Right.
And so I started looking outside the church. And so I think I looked at some prison ministry stuff that I got involved with early on there in San Antonio, got involved with the Gideons for a short while, but neither of those things were conducive to, me being a young father and the constraints, not constraints, but the responsibilities of,
Yeah.
being at home and also the military, being constantly moved around and stuff. Um, I started reading the Omega Letter, and I don't even know how I came across that article. It was Jack Kinsella, and so I signed on to their website. I was on there for,
Oh, the Rapture Ready website. Rapture Ready.
well, I think I might have found Jack Kinsella through Rapture Ready, but because sometimes they'll pick up articles, but they always usually link at the bottom, like he's the founder of Omega Letter, etc. So I go to Omega Letter, and I really like how he teaches. Jack was scholar par excellence. I mean, the dude had a awesome way of taking very complicated subjects and making it palatable and understandable to to anybody, to the average person. And but he sounded like a truck driver. He just had this real gravelly voice. And so, anyways, a couple of years after being on there, they invited me to write because I'd written some stuff in the forum, and stuff that I discovered or learned, and shared that with the wider audience. And then after that, they invited me to write. So I just remember telling his daughter, Carrie, I was like, because I think she was managing his website at the time. I was like, I've never really written anything like this before. I've written in college, I've written some Army stuff, doctrine stuff, not anything like this at all. And they were like, that's okay, just give it a shot. And for whatever reason, again, being a terrible student in school, I did have a 3.25 in college, but I mean, I really struggled with studying and learning. And this was all before ChatGPT. This was before
Sure.
Google, in a lot of cases, Google. I mean, I actually had to go to the library, find the book,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dewey Decimal System, and like look up,
Yeah.
Right.
cite it the old-fashioned way. And so that's so I started writing, and here I am all these years later. I don't even know how many. I was trying to think about how many articles I've done or videos. Articles, it's got to be over 700 plus. It's
Wow.
5 or 6 books. And then videos, I have no idea. I've probably done over 100 just myself. And then with all the interviews and stuff, it's probably closer to like 200.
Mm.
And then I've spoken really every year since about 2022 at conferences. So all over the world. So I mean, it's been a whirlwind. So that's my life story in a nutshell.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And how did you arrive at pre-trib when you were kind of reading through the Bible and all of that, trying to figure out?
Well, again, it goes back to like these simple principles of interpretation that I think I picked up from a lot of older writers, because back then I was reading a lot of people that had already long since died. Harry Ironside, Larkin, Woolvard, Ryrie was still alive, but I mean, most of the folks I was reading were either dead or were very up in their age. I think that the one principle that they all had in common, the one thing that they had in common, was this literal, grammatical, historical hermeneutic, and like how they interpret the Bible. Well, you can make the Bible say whatever you want. You can make it say whatever you want it to say, and people have. I mean, look at all the different cults we have around. I mean, you get on Twitter or X today, and for whatever reason, I got a lot of Mormons that post stuff on there, and then you bring up something like Galatians 1:9, and they laugh at it. They laugh at that verse, like, "Oh, that's not what it says. That's been debunked forever ago." And like, I mean, that's the attitude they have. So, I mean, you can make the Bible say whatever you want it to say. The trick isn't doing that. The trick is making it all consistent with each other,
Right.
and not contradict. So the only position that leaves you with is the pre-trib, the premillennial pre-trib position, because I say this a lot on my channel, but like the last days, it's not like a choose your own adventure book. It's not going to happen whichever way you want it to happen. There's only one way it's going to end.
That's
And
right.
if that's true, if that my understanding of that is true, then the Bible should only teach one way, and it does. Now you can go in and twist things around, and you can be consistent here, but then be very inconsistent.
But then everything's allegory or
Yeah. So
whatever.
you can take all of this allegorical, and then when it comes to prophecy, you're like, or you can take all that literal, and then it comes to prophecy. Oh no, that's just allegory. And
Yeah,
just
poetry.
the wave of the hand. So
Yeah. Yeah. I always find it interesting when people just kind of start learning themselves and come to that conclusion. We were talking about actually the church in China, underground church in China, and how all of them, just by studying God's word, all came to the conclusion like they're all pre-trib, that the rapture happens, and then the tribulation begins. So
Yeah.
Interesting. So you want to go ahead and
Well, the first thing we wanted to get you to explain, and I don't know, how deep this gets, but what is the Hegelian dialectic? Like what is that mean, and what is that about?
So, what's that guy's name? Friedrich von Friedrich Hegel, I think is his name. Friedrich, I don't know, was a German philosopher back in the 1800s, had come up with the dialectic of synthesis, antithesis, no, thesis, synthesis, or thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So you have the kind of the what is it? The cause and reaction, effect where you have a plan, you have an end state where you want something to be, and you set things in motion. That creates an obvious friction point, or that creates obvious hostilities or some crisis that emerges. And then the people cry out and demand for you to demand change, demand to fix it. So then you give them the fix, which you had in mind at the beginning. Now, Hegel didn't come out with that initially. That wasn't what his intent was, because he was looking at it more as in a philosophical level. But Karl Marx took that and ran with it, and then applied that in what we call now the Hegelian dialectic, where you have a synthesis, which is a stated position, like global governance. And then, so how do you get to global governance when everybody's still under this 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, the sovereignty of nations, and the nation is a sovereign state, etc.? How do you get around 193 nations and get to global governance? Well, then you set out to create a bunch of crises and a bunch of problems that have to be solved by stronger and stronger government. And then that
Like
government,
pandemics and things like that.
yeah, I mean, every time there's a mass shooting, they're always, the first thing the Democrat Party comes out and starts talking about gun control. They
Mhm.
try to capitalize on every single crisis like that, when the gun may have nothing to do with what actually was the cause. The cause was that there was some sick, twisted, demented person that
Right. Mentally
possessed,
ill.
drug riddled or whatever, and or had an agenda, hated a particular group of people and wanted to go out and take them out, and they completely dismiss the underlying reason, and they go simply for the tool. Except if the tool is a vehicle or a knife or a hammer or whatever else, they don't even care about that. It's just the gun, right? So
Mhm.
um,
Right.
that's like that's the good example of Hegelian dialectic.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah. So do you think that there's a gap between the rapture and the tribulation, or do you think we go straight from the rapture into the tribulation immediately?
I do think there's a gap. So the rapture, for those that are watching that don't, aren't that studied on this, the rapture does not start the tribulation. So what is the tribulation? The tribulation is Daniel's 70th week. Daniel 9:24 through 27, the angel Gabriel gives Daniel, he tells him 70 weeks are determined for you, Daniel being a Jew, your people,
Mhm.
and your holy city, which is Jerusalem. So it has nothing to do with the church. At this point in time in Babylon, this was I don't know, 545 BC-ish, somewhere around there.
Mhm.
Nobody, the church was a mystery. Nobody even knew what that was. They didn't even know
Right.
that God was going to do anything like that. And he says there's 70 weeks determined for your people Israel and your holy city Jerusalem. And those 400 and or those the first 69 weeks culminated. Well, it began with the decree by Artaxerxes, King Artaxerxes, the Persian king, Medo-Persian king, Artaxerxes' decree to Nehemiah in Nehemiah chapter 2 to go forth and restore the city and the walls and everything around Jerusalem. Because at that
Mhm.
point, the temple had been rebuilt, but the city was still laying in ruin. So that was in around 445 BC. And then you fast forward the 400 and I think it was 63. There was what's the 483 years from the going forth of the decree to the time of Christ,
Mhm.
to the time when the Messiah would be cut off. So if you're taking away the leap years and kind of all the weird calendar stuff that we go through, it lands perfectly on Palm Sunday. And that was the only day when Christ rode into Jerusalem that he allowed people to publicly worship him as the Messiah. And if you read Luke 19, at the end of it, he weeps over the city. He said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if you'd only known this was your day, this was
Mhm.
the day that they could have turned things around. but
Yeah.
they instead they rejected it, and now that's going to cost them. Their city's going to be destroyed. Their people are going to be killed. And so that was to the day. So that it concluded the 69th week. And when you read Daniel 9:26, it gives some specific stuff in there saying that the prince of the people who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And it also talks about the Messiah being cut off. So cut off being killed, right? But the
Hmm.
people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, we know that happened in 70 AD with the Romans. The Romans were
Hmm.
the ones who destroyed. They had laid siege to Jerusalem, I think, in 68 AD, and General Vespasian at the time was leading the charge. They surrounded Jerusalem. They were going to sack the city because of all the rebellions and things that had been happening. And this was just like a backwater province to the Roman Empire. They wasn't even that important to them, but there was always like this unrest and problems going on. So they finally surround the city. And then in 69 AD, Emperor Nero commits suicide, and he vacates the throne violently, right? So he commits suicide, and then that was the year of the four emperors. Was the year that these four guys tried to take hold of the throne, which Vespasian actually took the throne, but that left
Hmm.
his son, General Titus Vespasian. They had pulled back after Nero had died, and by the time the news got to them, they abandoned the siege, kind of pulled back. Were moving back to the shore, to the coastline, and then by then Vespasian had claimed control of the throne. He told Titus to go ahead and finish the city. So then they go back and re-surround the city, and in 70 AD on Tish B'Av, which would have been in July, I think that year, July or August, um, they sacked the city, and whatever the legions, they had like three or four different legions there, were so frenzied in their onslaught and killing of these Jews that they'd been trying to take the city for so long. They were so angry and frustrated that they ended up burning the temple down on accident. They didn't. Titus was going to convert that temple into a temple to Zeus, and so that was his intention. But because of everything caught fire, and then the gold started to melt between the stones, they ended up taking the stones apart, just like Jesus said they would. So
Hmm.
that concludes that first kind of chapter of Israel's history, right? So the 69th week ends at his crucifixion in 33 AD. 37 years goes by, then the destruction of Jerusalem. And in that whole time, they've been in this diaspora, or 1878 years roughly, from 70 AD all the way up to 1948. So they're in diaspora. And so that 69th week has never, that 70th week has never finished.
That's
Now, if
right.
you go back to Daniel 9:24, it says 70 weeks are determined, not 69 weeks or not
Hmm.
69 and a half. He says 70 weeks. So a week is a week of years in this instance. And we see reference to that, I think, back in Genesis 29, where Isaac, was it Isaac? Yeah, I think Isaac was working to marry Rebecca,
Hmm.
Hmm.
and he gets the other sister first. I'm
Well,
blanking
that
on
was Jacob.
Jacob.
He had to marry Leah, but he wanted Rachel.
Hmm.
one. That's right.
Laban
Thank you.
Laban tricked him.
I'm thinking of Isaac and Rebecca. So Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. So he wanted Rachel, correct?
Hmm.
And so then he gets tricked or whatever happens. And so Laban says, work for me one more week and we'll complete you can have the wife or whatever. So he works another 7 years. That completes his week, right? So we know the frame of this is a heptad. It's just a grouping of seven. Like we say decade, I don't have to explain that a decade means 10 years. You know what a decade means, right? So a heptad is a grouping of seven. So it's 7 years that is still hanging out there like one of those hanging chads. It's still out there in the future. It hasn't happened yet because the things that have to happen inside of it require a temple to be standing inside of it for the abomination of desolation to occur. That's where the Antichrist desecrates the Holy of Holies. That didn't
Hmm.
happen in 70 AD. The whole thing just caught fire. It wasn't desecrated in the same way that it had been in earlier times prior to Jesus. During the right before the Maccabean revolt, there was a king, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who was a Seleucid king, and he'd gone down to Egypt to conquer Egypt, which is at that time was under the control of the Ptolemies. And the Romans were the rising power, and they basically showed up on the beach and drew a line in the sand and told Antiochus, "Hey, if you cross this line, we're going to kill you. We're going to destroy your army, and we're going to go back and destroy everything, your whole kingdom." So he turns back and he goes up back north, which is back up through Israel to go back up to their capital of Antioch. And on the way up there, he had heard about rebellions. The people in Jerusalem thought he had already died because of the Romans showing up and stuff. So he goes up there and just lays pagan law down like it's you can't circumcise your sons anymore, you can't eat kosher, you can't sacrifice at the temple. And in fact, he'd gone into the temple to desecrate the Holy of Holies. He did that by slaughtering a pig on the altar and then erecting a statue of Zeus in there. That's what Jesus was referring to in Matthew 24:15, saying, let the reader go back and reflect on what Daniel the prophet talked about. And so that happened during, that happened prior to Christ, but Jesus was saying this was going to happen again in the future. Well, by 70 AD, there was no more temple. So there
What
wasn't
future?
Right.
and no Israel. So for the next
Right.
near 2 millennia, there wasn't an Israel for there to be. The Arabs weren't going to build a temple. The Ottoman Turks weren't going to build a temple, a Jewish temple. So
Yeah.
it had to be the Jews back in their land, back in control of Jerusalem. And at the political and geopolitical mindset at that point, religious mindset, to actually have the will to build that third temple. So I think we're close to that now.
Mm-hmm.
But to your original question, I know I rabbit trail.
No.
Oh, this was
We like
great.
rabbit trails.
This is
We're
good information.
we're eating this up. So you
Mhm.
go ahead.
So the 69th week happened at Christ's crucifixion, but the 70th has not yet happened. The
Mhm.
70th week starts in Daniel 9:27, and it begins with a covenant by the guy who is previously mentioned in verse 26, the prince who is to come, right? And that's coming out of the people that had destroyed the city and the sanctuary. So he's coming out of the Roman Empire from somewhere. He's going to be the one because he's the closest or the nearest antecedent. Which it says he then will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week, so a week of years. That's what starts the time for the 70th week, that 7 year tribulation period that's marked by 21 judgments, or 21 or more, maybe even 28 judgments, divine judgments that basically will take the world's population, and in our case today, we'll go from 8 billion people to less than half of that by the end. That's how many people will die in just 7 years. So just for like a point of reference, if you take all the wars that have ever been fought that throughout recorded history, and to what we know, I mean, you're basically looking at maybe close to 1 billion people over 6,000 years. And most of that happening within the last 2 centuries, really. In the first half of the tribulation, the first half, so that first 3.5 years, 2 billion people will die from the seal judgments alone. Double of what's died in the past 6,000 years will happen in just 3.5 years. The level of carnage and violence and death and destruction and mayhem. This goes back to why I think I have a hard time with the Left Behind, because they can't write how really bad it's going to be without it becoming like a great book. So
Yep.
So that's that covenant with the many, and we don't know what that covenant is. It might be a peace covenant, it might be the reinstitution of Mosaic law, or whatever the case is. Something happens that Israel, along with many other nations, agree with some kind of a covenant. That's what starts the 70th week. The rapture doesn't have any, there's no connective tissue to that. The only connective tissue that the rapture has to any of that is that it has to happen prior to it happening. So I mean, theoretically, that rapture
So we would not be here when the covenant is made.
No,
We would not see that covenant.
no. So, and even if you go back to like the 1990s, 93, I think is when the Oslo Accord, you had a lot of people coming out saying that was the covenant. A lot of people have said the Abraham Accords are the covenant. And maybe the Abraham Accords will be what it's based on, but it's not.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
that's
When
really
it's all finalized.
the rapture is not, doesn't have any signs leading up to it, and it doesn't have any markers. It's a signless event. It's not a secret. Uh, it's not a secret in the sense that nobody ever knew about it. They knew about it in the New Testament because that's where we get our understanding of it. But it's a signless event. It doesn't need anything to precede it. So it could happen right now. It could happen 10 months from now, 5 years from now. We don't know. So that's
Yeah.
the only rapture position. If people want to throw this passage on you like, no man knows the day or the hour. Well, the only way that that can be true is for a pre-trib position, because every other position you can mark it next to something, or it aligns with some period of time. The mid-trib, obviously you would know it's right in the middle, or three quarters,
Yeah.
pre-wrath, or at the second coming, as post-trib guys would like to say. Well, you would know because you would see Christ coming. It's going to be, the skies are going to peel back, and it's going to be everybody in the whole world, and even those that have died are going to see it from
Right.
Sheol, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call it.
Can I ask you a question? Can we go back to when you were talking about when Jacob had to wait 7 years on Rachel, that being a precursor to the last 7 years, or the 70th week? Sorry. So is Rachel is a representation of Israel?
Rachel would be the representation, I think, of, I've heard this before too. One is to the church and one is to Israel. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know which of the ladies is supposed to represent to. I think
Okay.
the bride, the Rachel was supposed to be Israel, if that makes sense. And then Leah would have been the church.
That's
I
what makes sense to me.
That makes sense to me
Mm-hmm.
because right, he had to wait on Rachel, and it's like God is going to have this 7 years to redeem what's left of Israel
Mm-hmm.
and graft them back in,
Yeah.
which is kind of the whole purpose of the tribulation, right?
Yeah. And so the rapture doesn't kick off this the 70th week, but it does open the gate, so to speak, for the day of the Lord, right? So the day of the Lord is both a general time frame, because it's a general time frame as well as being a very specific day. So the day of the Lord is at least 1,007 years long. It encompasses the whole tribulation, the 70th week, as well as the millennial kingdom. But the day of the Lord specific, and there's times in Scripture, and I have on my I think I have my Substack. I put all my charts and stuff up there, but I have all the passages associated with the specific day and those that are like general time frames. But the specific day of the Lord will be the second coming itself, that particular day.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
We need to go print his charts off.
that's right. Yeah, we'll link your Substack. It's excellent. I've been on there and gotten a lot of good information from there for sure. Um, yeah. So what do you think? Kind of just staying in the same vein as the tribulation. Who do you think is Mystery Babylon? Who do you think? Do you think that America could play a part in Mystery Babylon, or do you think that that is actual, literal Babylon?
Well, so I'm kind of agnostic on who exactly is Mystery Babylon, and I think because it's a mystery, comma Babylon, we're not going to know specifically,
Right.
this side of
It's
the
a good
rapture. But
good point.
um, there's two Babylons. So you have the ecclesiastical or the systemic Babylon, which we see in Revelation 17, that seems to span the whole globe, and it seems to be a system of sort.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have like commercial or like the political Babylon
Mm-hmm.
in 18. That's a geographic location, like a specific location. And so I've heard all of the cases of, literal Babylon back in Iraq, modern day Iraq. I've heard Jerusalem, Rome, New York City, Washington, D.C., the United States. I honestly, I don't know who is going to be that final Babylon. I will just say this about the United States. We are so powerful as a nation.
Yeah.
Either we are Babylon or we don't exist, or we are not in any kind of way, shape, or form, any
Mhm.
kind of a role player. So it's either one or the other.
Yeah.
I think I agree with that.
Yeah. I've what
That comes back
you know,
to
what
that comes
What
back
he
to the
just
idea
said.
of the rapture, like what happens at the rapture. If the rapture collapses the United States, and we fundamentally, I mean, the country and the cities are still going to exist on a map, and they're still going to exist in reality, but the whole structure of being a constitutional republic will fundamentally change. We will not be that anymore. I don't know what
yeah.
it's called, but it'll be some kind of a
Mhm.
new governmental system that may be a technocracy of some kind or oligarchy of some kind, but it will not be a
Yeah.
constitutional republic.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you because I've been studying the book of Isaiah, and like really going through it with a fine point. And it's really fascinating. But I got to like 11, 14. I mean, Isaiah 11, 14, somewhere around there. And it's when Isaiah was he was prophesying the destruction of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, or his grandson's Babylon. It was right before Cyrus went in and took it. And in that scripture, God says, this will remain a desolate wasteland. I think it said permanently, forever. So does that mean, like, to me, that says that Babylon will never come back again?
Yeah.
What do you think?
There, as well as in Jeremiah 49 and 50, or 50 and 51, one of those two are kind of mirror passages talking about the destruction of Babylon, like a permanent destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And I've flown over Babylon when I was in Iraq the first time, or the first deployment I had. We flew over that whole area, and there's nothing there. In fact, from the port, Al Fall port, and Iraq has a very, very tiny, they're not completely landlocked, but they might as well be. I mean, it's like a very tiny sliver of land where they have a little port there that could, that is a drainage for the Euphrates and Tigris. Well, back in the 90s, Saddam Hussein had drained that whole southern Iraq portion of it because there was the locals, the indigenous people were Shia, but they lived out in these marshy swamp kind of things, swamp marshlands that were kind of
There is a big swamp there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he had drained those to get rid of all of those indigenous people. So it's mostly desert now. And so that, to me, I have a hard time seeing ancient Babylon being rebuilt
in Babylon,
the center of global commerce. And let's just say that, and that's not to say it can't happen. I'm just saying right now, the way things stand, I have a hard time seeing that tyranny of the present and all that kind of stuff. But
and just him using the word mystery,
right?
She and I were talking about this the other day. I mean, don't you think when he's saying mystery, he's like, because he's seeing a vision. John's seeing a vision. He's trying to describe maybe some kind of modern,
something he's never seen.
Yeah, that he's never seen. Mm-hmm. He's saying mystery Babylon. It's like the Babylon we've heard of, but it's not.
Right.
Don't you think that's what he's meaning by saying mystery?
Well, yeah, and then you got to think too that Babylon, the statue that Daniel interpreted for Nebuchadnezzar, and I think Tyler from Gen 2434 made a good point. It's kind of resonated with me. The whole statue is Babylon. You start off with the head of gold. You have which is Babylon. Then you have the shoulders of silver, which is supposed to represent Medo-Persian Empire.
Yeah.
Abdomen of
Greece. Rome.
Greece, and then Rome, the leg of iron. But if the head is Babylon, the whole statue is Babylon. Like if my head is still, my feet are still part of me. You know what I mean? Like we're all still the same body. So we also know that Satan's seat changes over time. In Revelation, I think to the church in Pergamum, Jesus says that Satan's throne is there. Satan's throne wasn't always at Pergamum. It was at Babel. It was at Babylon later on. It seems to be moving from place to place. So again, Revelation 17 is a mystery. I don't think we're going to be able to understand exactly what that is. It might be a world political system like a zeitgeist where it's just anti-Christ, anti-Jew, anti-Israel, etc., which we've seen throughout the last 2,000 years. But Revelation 18, though, that commercial Babylon, that's where I have a hard time when you get to like Revelation 18, 17, I think it is, where it talks about the shipmasters.
Right.
Standing on the deck of their ships, looking offshore, looking at the city burning. The ancient Babylon, that's 300 miles or 200 miles or so inland. you're not going to be able to see the city burning from down where Kuwait is.
Hmm.
Uh, the only way that they can take that particular passage very literally is to say that sometime between now and whenever that Babylon exists, they have to do this major dredging operation like the Panama Canal and really open up all of Iraq and turn it into this giant waterway, big enough for ships and stuff to go up and down.
Hmm.
Something as wide as the Mississippi, perhaps. To go up and down to some city that doesn't exist right now, and even the whole country is so completely destabilized. Now, again, that's not to say it can't happen. I'm not completely ruling it out. I'm just saying where we are right now in 2026, it's hard to see that.
Right.
So,
We just don't see the Jewish people, the people of Israel, prescribing to some ruler coming out of original Babylon. It seems like more of a Western person,
Yeah.
or somebody from a different, just not an Arab,
yeah,
from an Arab descent. I mean, that's just kind of my
yeah.
opinion.
I
I
don't
feel
think
like,
we're going to ever accept an Islamic Messiah.
yeah, no, for sure.
Mhm.
So, what do you see? I mean, obviously, we all believe that the rapture is imminent. It could be any day now. The way things are shaping up. What do you see, like, primarily in the culture today for those that maybe don't think that the rapture is so close on the horizon as we do? What are so maybe your top 3 or 5 things that you're seeing take place now that make you think that the rapture could occur at any moment, as far as
Well,
a
oh,
geopolitical time? Hmm.
I would say obviously the number one sign is Israel's back in their land. So once they were back in their land as a nation, and even after recapturing Jerusalem in 67, they that that's what puts us back on the prophetic map where we kind of know where we are. Before Israel
Hmm.
was a nation again, you didn't know where you were. And that's why all these other eschatological positions rose up because people thought they were the kingdom. The Byzantines thought they were the kingdom. The Holy Roman Empire thought they were the kingdom. Augustine had promoted amillennialism, that the kingdom's right now, and we're ruling on earth and Christ is ruling in heaven. That's why they have a pope. He rules um, vicariously for Christ. That's why he's called the Vicar of Christ. He rules vicariously for Christ on the earth. And they
Mhm.
tried to merge human government with this church system to establish a kingdom on the earth, kind of like not trying to throw shade on this too much, but like this idea that Jesus is American and that he is going to make America great again just for the sake of making America great again, obviously is not true because America has a lot of a lot of issues. But so that had been tried for like 2,000 years almost, and it wasn't until Israel was a nation again that people woke up prophetically and like, whoa, this is what the Bible's predicted. The Bible said this was
Hmm.
going to happen. Amos chapter 9, Ezekiel 36, 37.
Hmm.
Jesus says, by implication, he's talking about the last days. And then he says, he starts off with the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, in Mark 13, and Luke 21. He starts off with saying that the temple was going to be destroyed. That's triggered the whole conversation. He's like, not one stone's going to be left standing on top of the other. Well, then the disciples come back to him. They ask him, well, when is the end of the age? What's going to be the signs? And when is it what's going to be the sign of your coming?
Hmm.
And so Jesus goes through the whole list of signs, wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, pestilence, the love of many growing cold. And then the midpoint of that whole time period was this abomination that causes desolation. Well, that can't happen unless Israel is back in their land, because again, the Arabs aren't going to build a Jewish temple. The Europeans aren't going to build a Jewish, like nobody has an incentive to do that. Plus, you have the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque up there and have been up there for over 1,000 years. So, I mean, something's going to happen to those buildings in order for them to be, for
Hmm.
a third temple to go up. So, you have all these signs, but one of the things that Jesus says in the parable of the fig tree, he says, when you see all of these things, uh, you know, it's that generation that's going to see all of those things. And so that's my second big sign. The first sign, Israel. The second one is the convergence of all of the signs. And, if you look back through history, we've always had wars, we've always had earthquakes, we've always had pestilences and famines and things like that. And Jesus quantified or qualified rather those signs in the Olivet Discourse by saying they'd be like birth pangs. I have 5 kids, so I know that I know the stages of pregnancy very well. I didn't have to go through them physically, but like I know from watching what happens, the trimesters and all that. So about the midway point, you start getting toward the end of the second trimester, you start getting those Braxton Hicks contractions, and then you get to that point where you're just so uncomfortable, and I think most of us feel incredibly uncomfortable in the world today with the way things are going.
That's so
Uh,
true.
and then you get to the
Wanting
point
the water to break.
Yeah, right.
and then you're waiting for the actual birth pains will come right before the very end. But once they start, they don't stop. They just keep getting harder and faster, harder and faster. And I think that is what Jesus was alluding to in listing all those, I think, 12 or 13 signs, that it would be like birth pangs. And
Hmm.
there is no other century like the 20th century. Even you could combine all the previous 20 centuries together, and they would not add up to the amount of carnage, death, innovation, technological change, economic, geopolitical growth, all of that, population growth, demographics, etc. The 20th century just took off, and it's unlike any other century. So now we're in the 21st century, and things are moving even faster. And so it's definitely not let up. It's definitely increased, just like Jesus said it was going to increase. So the convergence is the second sign. Third sign, I think, would be the exponential rate of change with technology. In the book of Revelation isn't a technological book, but it does mention some things that happen that have technological implications to them. The 2 witnesses that are killed in Jerusalem, and everybody around the world sees their bodies lying on the streets. Well, before the advent of satellite television, that was impossible. Before now we have smartphones and cameras everywhere and satellites and everything else that now that's possible. The whole mark of the beast technology wasn't possible prior to, really our generation, because I think probably the earliest thing we could even allude to that being would be like an RFID chip, or somehow putting barcodes on people's hands. Back in the 90s, I think people thought about barcodes being the mark of the beast and all that. But now it's not what the mark of if the mark of the beast can come, it's like which way can it come now? Because there's so many different ways that it can come. We just don't know which variation is going to be the final iteration of it. And then another technology thing in there implied is that I think it's in Revelation 9:6, if I'm not mistaken, it talks about that when the demonic locusts are released and people are getting stung and they're being tormented for months on end, and people are wanting to die. They're trying to kill themselves, but they can't die. Somehow, I don't know if the mark does something genetically to people where like they heal real fast or something, but there's some type of change that happens at that point, like some kind of new Ozempic thing that people can inject this thing, and now like they just they constantly heal, so it's supposed to promote aging, or this anti-aging technology stuff. That all didn't exist prior to like 20 years ago. That's all very relatively new. This anti-aging, who's a guy in Genesis, the Methuselah Project is like one example. That's billionaires are pouring billions and billions of dollars in how do we extend human life, and they're figuring it out.
Yeah. Sorry, I've had the flu this week.
Oh, it's okay.
So sorry, I had a cough. I was going to say, I think COVID really ushered in the whole thing of longevity.
Yeah, and COVID also sped us up technologically speaking, like 6 years. If COVID hadn't happened, and I was having a conversation with my supervisor today about this, think about it. If COVID didn't happen in 2020, we would not have people working from home, all the telework stuff, that would still be years out. Maybe this year, the bandwidth would have finally caught up, but because everybody had to work from home, that forced the bandwidth to have to be amped up dramatically, and that forced software companies to develop better software and easier software to stream or to do whatever. the information packets and all that gets more compressed, more efficient. The chips get smaller, more powerful, computers, etc.
Have you heard about, so Bill Gates has the microneedle patch implant that's supposed to install both modified mRNA and permanent quantum dot QR codes into your body. Um, have you heard about that or?
Yeah, he had they had a patent for it, W060606 or something to that effect. I don't
It says biological vaccine passport.
Yeah, that's coming. Now Bill
So do
Gates
you think?
he may not be the delivery guy now that he's all over the Epstein list.
Yeah.
Right.
His name is pretty much mud at this point,
Yeah,
but
but someone will pick it up.
somebody will.
I think they're getting ready to really do a whole reset on those leaders, like the Bill Gates of the world, George Soros, even the Obamas, the Clintons. I think they're getting ready to kind of clean that. And I think the Antichrist leadership team, so to speak, is getting ready to emerge, whoever that is. Don't
Do you think that?
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, well, the narrative we've been trying to watch what the Democrats are going to try and rally around for the midterms in the 2028 election because they've been leaderless, rudderless, directionless. Like they've just been, even before the election, they had Sleepy Joe and Kamala, leading the group, and they didn't know what they were doing. So the Democrats were pretty much in disarray. But one of the things that seems to be interesting coming out of all this, beyond the ICE, beyond the Immigration Act, all that kind of stuff, is pitting the billionaire class, these tech billionaires, and pitting them all as elite pedophile, reprobate, whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to think, Trump's got Lutnick, he's got Elon Musk, he's got a lot of people in his pockets, not pockets, on his side to help
Yeah.
push forward this whole idea of Fortress America. And, I think they're trying to divorce those groups from Trump and take him back and alienate him back to being alone so they can target him and wear him down, et cetera, et cetera. So I see that narrative shaping up, and there does seem to be this push to want to lump them all together so that they can discredit them completely from government, from office, from running anything, from being involved in politics, etc. But with the advancements in AI is going to be so revolutionary in how it changes. I don't see how these technocrats are going to be out for very long. I mean, they seem to be the new force multipliers going forward.
Like the new kings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's turning into private individuals rather than corporations now. And so they hold a lot of power. Sorry, y'all,
No, you're
with
fine.
my voice.
Um,
Go ahead.
Did we want to
Yeah,
ask him about
no,
that?
I just wanted to ask real quick about kind of along still. We think we've kind of talked about this, that the supernatural realm is going to really start becoming more visible as we get closer to the rapture, certainly into the tribulation. How do you see that? Do you think that? And then if so, how do you think the Nephilim are going to play into that whole thing?
Well, so yeah, I think back in 46, Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard conducted their Babylon working groups out in the desert of California, and they basically they were summoning some kind of spirit entity to take over. And instead of the men, because he was working with the JPL, the rocket propulsion, developing all that technology behind that NASA uses for space flight and everything. Instead of man going to the stars, they were trying to bring that here, right? So they invoked something, and then 18 months later, you had Roswell happen, and then we had Israel became a nation, and then things seem to just be kind of going off the rails ever since because we've had this massive uptick in like UFO or UAP
Mm-hmm.
sightings. The paranormal seems to have been really ramping up around the US, in terms of, haunted places and, everything else like that. But I think that the restrainer, who is the Holy Spirit working through the church, is still restraining. And so there's only so much they can do at this point. But the minute that the church is removed, the church, we are universally the church, right? We are the corporately singular body of Christ. So we're corporate in the sense that we're many parts, many people, but we make up one singular body, which is the body of Christ. And that is, we're indwelt by the Holy Spirit at the moment of salvation, which is said there in 2 Corinthians 1, 21, 22, Ephesians chapter 1, Ephesians chapter 4, very explicit language that we are sealed by the Holy Spirit until the day of redemption. So if the Holy Spirit is the restrainer and he's indwelling these bodies, we are the temple of Christ, right? The temple of God right now, right? With the Holy Spirit indwelling us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we are taken off the earth, then we are creating this gigantic spiritual vacuum, right? And that's where I think the supernatural world is going to explode onto mankind in a way that we haven't seen yet. We've only seen in movies. And that may be part of how they're able to explain away the rapture. This is in part with the great delusion that Paul talks about in Second Thessalonians, that people are going to believe this lie, that it was aliens that took us, or that we were aliens, that the Christians were aliens, and that somehow we were activated and sent back to our home planet or whatever. I think
Right.
Disclosure Day movie or
Yeah.
whatever it's called is coming
Some
out.
crazy story they'll make up. Yeah.
That's what it seems like they're kind of alluding to with that Spielberg movie. So yeah, I do think, I've had in a hotel room in Kentucky, I had a demonic entity that I recorded on my laptop, both audio and visual on it. I still have it, and I've shown it to a whole bunch of people. I had it up on TikTok for a long time, and I took it down eventually because I ran it by L.A. Marzulli, and he's like, "Dude, that's a curse." But
So you deleted?
I still have it, but I thought, well, if it's a curse, I don't want to be cursing everybody. So
Yeah.
Mm,
I was just trying to figure out the language on it.
that's interesting.
So, well, since we're talking about that, and we were talking about Iraq and all that. So, do you think that we went in to Iraq and got Nimrod's body
Oh, back to the
and
Nephilim.
are trying to clone him?
So to the original question about the Nephilim, I do think that will take place, but not like giants. I don't think they need giants these days. I think they need more like Steve Rogers, like Captain America type super soldiers,
Right.
people
Yep.
that are more than human, that are augmented
Right.
technologically or whatever, chemically, in some way, shape, or form. Um, Now, I don't think that question that they found in the email from Hillary Clinton is indicative. I think that was somebody asking that question. We never saw the response or whatever. It was just on their server somewhere. But I do think that we've probably found bodies like that, and not just Nimrod or Nephilim type bodies. Think about all the giants that they found over the last 120 years in America, different places, they found these bodies that were like 8 feet tall, 9 feet tall, where
Yeah.
then the Smithsonian gets a hold of them and we never hear of them again. So those things are gone. So the intelligence agencies obviously know, hey, we know where those things are because we were the ones hiding these things. So they probably extracted DNA and we're beginning to mess around with that stuff. So in the 1950s, well, let me back up. 1920s and 30s, the Third Reich was rising and Hitler was infatuated with the occult. Same with
Yeah.
Himmler and his henchmen. And they wanted to harness that power of the Black Sun in order to make their army the greatest and mightiest force on the planet. So the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's a lot of truth to that because the Nazis were trying to get any edge that they could get. And
Right.
they weren't below, going out and trying to get the ark, parade that
Yeah.
around the Panzer divisions and stuff. So this idea goes back a long ways. This idea of mixing the supernatural UFO or occult into everyday life, whether it's alchemy, trying to convert regular metal into gold, or you're trying to make super soldiers. There's always this desire to become more than what we are, to gain power and to hold on to that power. And so I think right after that it was like the 1950s when the two gentlemen discovered the DNA, human DNA strand, the deoxynucleic, whatever it stands for, acid, the whole DNA thing. They began mapping that out in the 1950s. So by the 90s, we had Dolly the lamb, the sheep. Remember Dolly,
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
clone? Who knows what they've done since then in terms of cloning and I mean, there's so much stuff out there. They've got like mice that glow in the dark. They've got pigs that glow in the dark. They've got mice with like human attribute. Like it's weird. They've done so much, and we're
Tell
just
them about the guy you interviewed.
I
She used to be HR.
I worked in HR and worked at in healthcare, and we would hire security guards. And so I interviewed this guy who was former military security in the military, and this was back in the mid 2000s. And so I was not awake at all. I mean, I was a Christian, but I was not awake. And he was telling me that he had done this, secret whatever, and they had taken him somewhere, and he didn't know where he was going. I don't know if he was, he was put not blindfolded, but they couldn't see. And he showed up at this location, and he was walking by certain rooms, and he looked in, and he saw a half human, half ostrich person. And the way he was telling the story, I was like, I believe what he's saying. But I'm like, that is insane. I was because back then,
I believe you, but I can't hire you.
I'm like, I'm just, just having babies. I'm living my best life. I'm not thinking at all about anything that we talk about these days. And so anyway, I've never forgotten it, obviously. But I thought, gosh, I mean, the way he's telling the story seems real genuine. So I don't know. It was interesting.
I mean, I never came across that stuff in my 20 years, but like, I mean, I wasn't in DARPA, I wasn't in these ultra secret groups too. So, if the Germans were trying to do this stuff back in the 30s and 40s,
Yeah.
we know the Chinese have tried this, the Japanese have tried this, the Russians are doing this. So we're not the only country that's trying to get that edge, that military edge right now. So. Yeah, I think going back to that Revelation, was it 8:6 or 9:6, talking about the people that want to die that can't die.
Yeah.
There may be something inside of the mark itself, the mark of the beast, whether it's a quantum dot tattoo or whatever, that it in through nanotechnology, through whatever, it has this, it seems to like have this rapid healing kind of thing where you go to shoot your head off, take your own life or something because you're
Mm,
tired of being tormented by these locusts. And you can't die. So now you're walking around with half your head and you're still alive. Like you cannot die. So
yeah. It could
it's
be
gonna be
real
bizarre.
freaky.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be real freaky for sure.
Um, what about, because you said you were in Afghanistan, and so my husband and I were watching a YouTube where somebody was giving like it was a military guy, but maybe his face was covered, and he was giving testimony, and they were telling the story about capturing and killing a giant out of a cave there. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah. The giant of Kandahar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
So I would just say about Afghanistan, if there were giants still left on the earth, that's probably a place that they could live because a lot of some places there are so remote.
Right. And not be bothered.
Yeah. Or, I think in this instance, I think I tend to think that story, I don't know if I 100% believe it because the two main guys telling the story over the course of years, their stories don't exactly line up. So I don't know one of them is telling the truth or neither of them are telling the truth. Or they're both just.
Or could it have been really traumatizing and you forget the details later?
Yeah. So I
You
think there's
know,
probably some truth to it. Again, I haven't heard of a squad going missing or dying or anything like that, but I would just say that if there was a place on planet Earth where giants could still hide, it would be a place like Afghanistan, especially back in 2003.
yeah.
So,
Interesting.
but you go back to Genesis 6:4, and it says that there'll be giants on the earth in those days and afterwards. I'm paraphrasing that, but
Well, when
There-
it says in the days of Noah, could it mean that too?
So I heard L.A. Marzulli talk about this just yesterday. He said that when Jesus said in the days of Noah, he said that Nephilim bones were on display at that time. And he said so everybody would understand that he was referring to the Nephilim because those bones were on display where he was talking to his disciples, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know if you, Pete, if you've heard that him talk about that before, what you think.
I haven't, but that'd be fascinating if he's got. I mean, I'm sure he's got some historical references to point to show that, hey, yeah, they were actually looking at these bones. I mean, they found bones in the Americas in the 1800s and 1900s. So, I mean, if these things were as prevalent as they would have been, then we should be finding bones all over the place, and which explains a lot of the cyclopean type of structures we've seen built all over the world. These massive megalithic, structures of that normal humans don't seem like they'd be able to build, just under our own strength, especially back in the day when you're using like donkeys and horses to to haul.
Yeah, no equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that in the ancient world, like the Greek and Roman gods, do you think those really could have been real gods that were Nephilim?
Yeah, I do. I
Like
think
Zeus, Apollo, Mercury, Achilles, all those people maybe were actually real people or real giants or whatever,
Hybrids.
so.
hybrids.
I think all of ancient mythology comes from the pre-flood days. So when you have people living for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, plus um, you had Nephilim, you had these fallen angels that came down and they intermingled with human women. They had children with them. These children were giants, and they were cannibals, and there was all sorts of other things, and not just humans. They were also interbreeding with animals or mixing animal DNA to stuff together. They were doing all sorts of stuff. So I think people were just larger back then too. I think the average person was probably like 6'5", somewhere in that neighborhood. That was the average height. So then you have these giants that are over 10 feet tall, 12, 13, 14 feet
Mhm.
tall. We're still menacing in that sense. So yeah, you have the survivors of the flood, obviously Noah and his wife, and then you have Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their wives, and they're telling their children what life was like before the flood. And I think that a lot of those stories go from being like history to now becoming mythology, especially after the Tower of Babel, when God scatters mankind. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
all these cultures have very similar, they have the same gods, they just change the names,
Yeah,
names
Mm-hmm.
change, but they have these
yeah.
ziggurat structures everywhere, in every continent. They've got these massive,
Egypt has some similar gods too.
yeah, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Akkadians, the Chaldeans, the Assyrians, um, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and all the other various groups that lived at that time. I mean, they would conquer one place, would conquer another place or take over, and they would take that same god and just tweak his name a little bit. So instead of being called Baal, they were calling him Bel, or
Mm-hmm.
Aphrodite. He was Aphrodite, and before that, she was called something else. So I don't know. They're the same gods, different names, but I do think that all of ancient mythology stems from ancient history, pre-flood history.
My
So
husband and I were talking about the other day how growing up, because we were in grade school in the 70s and high school in the 80s, but they would always make us do a semester on mythology. And we were always like, why are they teaching us this?
We were still doing
Yeah,
it when
we had to test on it and all that. Anyway, it's just weird thinking about all that now. Like maybe it wasn't mythology.
yeah,
yeah.
well, it all has its roots in some truth.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
So, we kind of, since you have a military background, we were wanting to talk about just wars that are on the horizon. We keep hearing about Iran, but nothing's happening. What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's called Operation Sun and Lion, for the Persian flag, but I think they've just moved the second carrier group there. into the Persian Gulf area or the Arabian Sea. Um, so I do think that there will be a strike on Iran, not on, obviously not on the people, but on the military, the missile, ballistic missile capabilities, etc. I do think that that's going to happen. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend moving a group like that into that area. I don't see
Yeah.
that that's going to just happen for nothing. So they're going to get something out of it. And so I do think a strike on Iran, they couldn't do this a month ago because they didn't have anything in place to do it. And the fear wasn't necessarily that Israel or that Iran would strike Israel, because they've tried that before and it didn't get them anywhere. Like they just were able to shoot everything down. The real danger is hitting Saudi Arabia and hitting the oil fields that are there on the eastern side of the peninsula, which is
Okay.
right across the Persian Gulf. So they're super close to Iran and they're very vulnerable. And so I think Trump, in weighing the cost and benefits, if he's thinking through this from a business mindset, how much of the world's traffic goes through the Persian Gulf or goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And you've got the Houthis, which are being funded by the Iranians. And so there's been a huge drop off on naval traffic going up the Persian Gulf, or not the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea up into the Strait of Hormuz because of all the terrorist strikes and the piracy and all that stuff. So I think with Trump taking or regime changing Iran and putting just a stable government back in there, they will already benefit the world economy significantly, because now the Houthis are not going to just operate. They get all their funding and money from Iran. So if Iran is, and that's why we haven't seen a whole lot of them as of late, because they're just, it's kind of like Cuba is right now, right? So Cuba was being supported by Venezuela, and Venezuela was they were getting all their money from the narco trafficking and from selling sanctioned oil, et cetera, and helping the Russians out and the Chinese and making those kinds of deals with them. But once we take the leader of Venezuela out, then a domino effect happens. So taking out the regime in Iran will have a domino effect as well that will presumably stabilize the region. I mean, I think they're trying to weigh this politically, and is this going to work? Um, so yeah, I do think they're going to strike Iran, and I think they'll take out their leadership. And what comes after that, I have no idea. We know that they're a factor in Gog and Magog, that they play a role in that. To what extent, I don't know, but they are part of the grouping of nations that are involved.
Do you think they'll go in like they did in Venezuela with that type of weaponry, or do you think they're going to go in, which is old school, if you will, or whatever?
I don't think Trump has any appetite for another Middle East land war where we put boots on the
Yeah.
ground. Now, I think that they probably have tier one groups operating in and around Iran, causing explosions, causing all kind of mayhem and chaos, probably aiding and abetting the protesters to whatever degree with weapons, supplies, intelligence, technology, whatever they can give them. So there's not just the Americans, but probably the Mossad, probably probably different European nations are probably also committed in helping do this regime change, get Khamenei out, get the IRGC out of control, or get them out.
Yeah, I don't think it's all about the nuclear weapons. I really think it's about a regime change. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I think
and
he feels like if he can get a regime change there, he doesn't have to really necessarily worry as much about he thinks about the nuclear weapons.
well, I think he knew they weren't going to make a deal. Like I think he knows it. He knows that he's not stupid. So I think he was just making a deal with them to, one, show that, hey, I'm trying to make a deal with these guys. They don't want a deal. They don't want a deal. Okay, you want the hammer? I'm going to give you the hammer. I tried to give you the carrot. You didn't want the carrot. I'm going to give you the hammer now. I think
So
that,
do we have warfare capabilities that nobody knows about except
yes,
our military?
yes.
So do you think like under the Biden administration, it seemed like our military just kind of took a nosedive, but I don't know that that's necessarily true. I mean, maybe it is. They seem to be doing a lot of terrible things to our military under that administration. Do you think Trump has just rebuilt it so quickly, or do you think that it stayed pretty stable in that and under his administration for that period of time? What do you?
No, I mean, after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, really after the elections, I think a lot of military folks were very soured on the whole idea of the election and just the way things were turning out, and plus COVID and all the draconian.
Yeah.
I had just retired, 2 months before COVID became a thing. I'm thinking now, if I had to stay in, if I wanted to stay in, I would have had to take those shots and those boosters. I mean, I would have had to or else I would have, had to get out. So I think
Yeah.
I think Trump's in the recruiting year on end during the Biden administration was dropping and dropping, and none of the branches were able to make their quotas, and just the quality of people coming in, it was just, yeah, it was absolutely terrible, and the whole morale was just sinking through the floor. I mean, when you got guys like Mark Milley and I can't remember who the defense secretary of defense was, the big black guy that went missing for like a week to go have surgery, and like nobody knew about.
Yes, I do
Then
remember that.
those clowns leading, yeah, of course, nobody wants anything to do with that. So, yeah, I think Pete Hegseth is a great Secretary of War. I think because he was a major, he got out retired as a major. He's deployed. He knows like what it's like he knows how bad it sucked over the last 20 years.
Mhm.
So he's fixing all those things. And some of the things he's trying to fix are like things that no other Secretary of Defense has wanted to tackle in decades. Acquisition process, like taking an idea from the napkin that you drew it out on at a bar to actually getting it made and implemented and out on the front lines with the soldiers. And that normally takes decades. He's like,
Right.
I want to turn that into months and maybe a year.
Mhm. Right.
So
Yeah, some of the changes that this administration has made so quickly just seem supernatural, like not feasible for the regular person. It just
yeah,
also seems like they have done so much. I mean, obviously, God's hand is on all leaders, and He's moving them through His hands. But it just seems like they're not going to relinquish power. Like I can't see them in 2 years saying, "Okay, sayonara, we're going to have a regular election, and we're going to run the risk of losing all that we've just done."
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Were you surprised by Trump granting Qatar permission to build an Air Force facility at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho?
I'm not surprised. I mean, I guess the timing is a little suspect to me, but like we've had the Saudis, we've had a lot of joint military stuff with the Saudis, Qataris, etc. over the years. So
Why?
I'm surprised by Idaho, but I mean,
Seems odd on our soul. I don't know. That just seemed odd to us that I don't think we've ever had that on our soul before.
Have we?
Maybe I'm
it's not, it's
mistaken.
not, it's not a Qatari base. They're training. I think they're training their pilots here.
Right.
We've been doing that for a long time, though.
Okay.
For
So
sure.
you didn't see anything too
I don't, I
concerning.
don't, I don't know the ins and outs of why Idaho versus Fort Rucker, Alabama versus, San Antonio, Joint Base San Antonio, some of these other places where there's a lot of training, Air Force training, but Idaho may be so secluded, that base, that you can keep them all kind of there contained. I don't know, but traditionally we've had these kind of joint ventures with a lot of different countries over the years. So we've had the
Yeah.
Saudi US. We had a lot of Middle Eastern officers that come over to train and they just go missing. We have no idea where they just take off. So yeah, that's been going on since, I don't know, at least 20 years.
Wow. That's interesting. Do you think the Ezekiel 38 war, things are kind of shaping up? I saw some things with Turkey today and some alignments that they were doing. Do you think that the Ezekiel 38 war, is that at the beginning of the tribulation, or do you think it's the war they discussed at the end, that Revelation mentions at the end?
I think it's at the beginning. In fact, I think it's after the rapture, but before the start of the 70th week. So in that gap
Uh,
period, and however long that gap is, I don't know. And the reason I think that is because one, right now Israel's untouchable, and the world knows that. So even under Biden, Israel was, you know, other than October 7th, no other nation was going to launch a major war against Israel. Um, so I think it happens at the beginning for a couple of reasons. One is that uh, the chaos that the rapture will unleash just by the sheer event itself, with millions, tens of millions of people disappearing, is probably going to collapse the United States to some degree, or put us in a world of hurt that basically the US locks down, and we basically martial law. I mean, everything shuts down, and you're going to have chaos, and that'll just be worldwide. And you would have the economic fallout from that. Of course, the stock markets, all that will tank, and so that will have a ripple effect everywhere else. So um, and then you have the nations that are involved: Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Seemingly Russia. I've heard Germany, I've heard other countries, but those nations get involved because now they see they have a target of opportunity. Like, oh, the U.S. can't respond, so
Right.
now let's attack it. Let's get rid of the little Satan first, and then we'll go out. The big Satan seems to be taking care of itself by collapsing inward or whatever. Now let's take out the little Satan. They think they're going to create this kind of Islamic utopia on the planet. So they're all going to amass, and they're going to come out of Europe. They're going to come out of Russia. They're going to come from basically all the cardinal directions against Israel. And it's going to be so overwhelming that Israel is going to seem like there's no solution other than the Samson solution, where they basically nuke themselves to kill all their enemies, which is not something that's a total last straw thing for them. So, but God intervenes, he saves them, delivers them. And then at the end of that, there's a massive earthquake in Jerusalem that seems to it just kills 7,000 in the city. But if I were a betting man, I would think that the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque get destroyed or leveled during that earthquake that hits Jerusalem. So that takes away any of the last um, constraints against building a third temple, since the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are no longer standing. They're just a pile of rubble. Now that people have the political will at that point to actually build a third temple. And then on top of that, when you go back through history and you look at what does the Jews think about the Battle of Gog and Magog, so going back to the second, third, fourth centuries, all the way up through the Middle Ages and beyond, the Jews look at the Battle of Gog and Magog as the final battle. Because when you read Ezekiel 36, 37 is all about the restoration of the nation. 38, 39 is Gog and Magog. And then chapter 40 onward is about the new temple. And there's 8 chapters about the new temple and the animal sacrifices and all that stuff. So they think they're done. They tie in Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14, which are other, very messianic second coming type passages. They would tie that in with Ezekiel 38, 39. So they think they're done, and that's why I think they have no issue with making a peace treaty or whatever kind of covenant with this new political rising leader that comes out of Europe, like a European Donald Trump kind of guy.
All right, that makes sense.
And so they don't have the New Testament. They don't read the New Testament. They don't accept it as canon. So they don't know about the Olivet Discourse. They don't know about the Book of Revelation, and they probably know about it, but they don't know what it says. And Armageddon, like none of that stuff is in their mind right now. So they're booking.
Do they not read Daniel? Do they? I mean, are there any prophets that they do not?
I think they
look at it all, or is it only like the first 5 books for them?
Some, you got to remember, Judaism is divided up into a bunch of different sects between the Orthodox, the Reformed, I don't know. There's like 5 or 6 different groups, and some of them are very much they put all the emphasis on the Torah, right? The first 5 books, and then the other books are a lot more. They can take it like allegorically or non-literally, or I mean they have a hard time with passages like Isaiah 53 or Daniel 9. Because of how specific those passages are about Jesus and about how he would die and when he would die. And so they tend not to focus on those or read those at all. So, and then you have the Talmud later on, and the Kabbalah and all these other things. They all seem to point to Gog and Magog, that battle in Ezekiel being the final battle. And then after that is the Messianic age. So, and again, remember the Messiah to the Jew. I'm not talking about a Messianic Jew, but like just an Orthodox regular Jew that subscribes to Judaism. To them, a Messiah is not God incarnate. God is one, the Father in heaven, God Almighty, and He's a spirit. He doesn't come to earth. So their Messiah is like political figures like Moses, David, people like that. So it's just a regular man that God chooses. They could very easily see just some new like Donald Trump type guy that may have half Jewish, a quarter Jewish or whatever. He has some kind of street cred with them to make their guard go down a little bit. So they accept whatever deal that this comes out of this. So, and they think they're done. They think
Do you think, building a temple seems like that would take a long time, especially if the tribulation is kicking off. Could that temple be like the temple in that Moses that they built in the wilderness, more like a temporary structure, but they start doing sacrifices in it? But it would be up on the mount, like you said, because all that stuff gets destroyed.
The tabernacle?
Yeah, tabernacle in the wilderness.
No, I think once I've read enough of quotes from people involved with the Temple Mount Institute and all that, the Temple Mount faithful, like I think they can build the temple fairly quickly. Like I don't think it would take more than 6 months to get it done.
Wow.
A lot of this stuff is already pre-made, pre-cut. They just are waiting for the right time to do it.
So they could essentially do that when the tribulation kicks off and the first seal is released and the Antichrist comes into some. I've read, that he could be coming in as the Antichrist, but he's going to come in as some kind of leader, but they're of course not recognized as such yet. But he could essentially start that. That could be part of that peace agreement, don't you think?
Yeah, he could. This leader could also, the Antichrist could come in and approve or agree with or dictate that Israel now is operating back under their as a theocracy, with the Temple Mount Mosaic laws in effect, etc. So anybody that goes in Israel has to obey the Mosaic law, or they're under some kind of Noahide laws or something like that. So it may be something that everybody agrees on with that. Another idea could be that they build the temple and the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are still standing. So now you have both of those religions up there, which to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense because I think at the end of Gog and Magog, you're going to see basically the neutering of Islam as a militant political force in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's going to be wiped out. I mean, a huge chunk of their military-aged males are going to die in this conflict. And the most rabid, the most, hardcore, hard-charging Islamists out there, and they're going to get destroyed. So what's left? I mean, you're going to have an empty husk of a shell of a religion, and I don't think it'll be any more violent than Buddhism is today, or or Shinto or Zoroastrianism. So I don't think it's going to be much of a force after Gog and Magog. That's what opens again. It opens another vacuum for a new world religion to kind of rise to the top. And I think there's no other religion better suited to do that than Roman Catholicism. Logistically, yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah. So you think maybe the Pope could be a good candidate for the false prophet? Do you think, or do you not hold a thought on that?
I don't think he is personally. I look at a guy like Noah Yuval. Noah Yuval
Harari.
Harari as
what's his name?
Harari.
Noah Yuval.
Yuval.
Or
That's right.
Yuval Noah Harari, whichever way it is. I look at him as like that guy is a to me, like a great candidate for the false prophet. Like he is just so blasphemous. I mean, every time that guy opens his mouth, he's blaspheming God. So
He nearly
any,
hisses every time he talks. Like it's
Yeah.
almost it's very unsettling, I think.
yeah,
Mm.
So back to Israel, because us being, we are supporters of Israel just because we believe it's biblical, but we do have like Reformed and Calvinist family
yeah.
and friends who, and even other, people have sent us, emails or DMs, and they'll say, the Jews aren't really the Jews. The Jews in Israel are not really biblical Jews, and that the land is not the land that God granted them. That was granted to the actual, Jews in the Bible, and that's all. That covenant's over with. And so these are totally different people, and this has nothing to do. So I guess that's how they explain away, kind of what a miracle it is that the Jews came back into the land in 1948 and Israel did become a nation again after 2,000 years of being scattered. And so what would you say to that? Like,
Well, I would just ask the question, so who did a lot of, I've heard this where they're saying that the Jews that came out of Europe aren't really Jews,
right,
European, blah, blah, blah. I would say then,
Ashkenazi and whatever.
Sephardic. So who did Hitler kill? Did he kill 6 million fake wannabe Jews, or were they really
Right.
Jews? You know, it would have been super easy for those guys to say like, yeah, I'm not Jewish. I mean, whatever, but they
Right.
never denied that, and they get hauled off into these concentration camps. So I think that they're really Jews, and they really are the only people that would have a desire to restore Israel back to its ancient uh, one, to go back to their ancient homeland, the biblical homeland, and two, to restore the culture, restore the religion, the dietary restrictions, all of that. Nobody else has why would anybody else do that for the sake of doing it? You know what I mean? Like there's no motivation, there's no benefit, especially when the world hates you. And so I guess the other thing is when I talk to these people, you'll find very quickly that they're not very well steeped in church history. To go through this quickly, basically for the first 3 centuries of the church was largely premillennial. Now they didn't have the perfect understanding of the rapture and everything because the Bible was just being put together, and not everybody had a complete Bible at that time until at least the middle of the second century. And then secondly, there was a lot of Israel had been conquered by the Romans, they'd been scattered, the temple was destroyed. So now you just have these pockets of Jewish communities and synagogues all over the place, but largely the world was Gentile, and the gospel was going out, and it was being accepted very largely. It started out in Israel, it started out in Jerusalem, Judea, and then began to spread outwards from there, right? And then it goes
Hmm.
to largely Gentile communities. So now these Gentile communities are thinking, well, you guys crucified our Messiah. Of course God's mad at you. And so that was kind of the mindset that began to seep into a lot of these pockets around the Roman Empire. But again, at that time, the Christians were being persecuted not just by the Romans, but they were being persecuted by the Jews too. The Judaizers would come along, and these are the people that Paul was wrestling with in his day. Which is part of why he wrote Galatians and Hebrews. Then you have in the third century, you have a guy named Origen that came along, and he was the first real kind of influencer of that day, Christian influencer that began to take a non-literal approach to the Bible. So he began to allegorize certain portions of the Bible, and people listened to him. They respected him. I mean, he did some good things. I'm not saying he was complete reprobate, but he began to allegorize a lot of prophecy. And then that was condemned by 299 by Nepos. There's this thing called the Schism of Nepos, and basically Nepos is making the point that if amillennialism is heresy, point blank, to say that the kingdom is now and that we're ruling, et cetera, and Christ is never coming back. This idea is heretical. Champion that position was Augustine about 100 years later. And Augustine was very popular. So when he wrote The City of God, it was very impactful and it was very influential. And that was basically the eschatology that was coming, now being developed and incorporated into this new legalized Christianity inside of Rome that would become, in a couple centuries, the Roman Catholic Church as we know it. And that became their logical bedrock. And that's the way it was for the next 1,000 years. They were the kingdom on the earth. Christ was ruling in heaven. That gave the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, the political wasta, as they would say in Saudi Arabia, the political power to claim that he was speaking for God. When he sits on the throne at St. Peter's Basilica, he's speaking ex cathedra, that what he says comes out of his mouth on that throne is directly from God to mankind. Then you had the whole Holy Roman Empire, developed there in the 800s. And that went all the way up to the Reformation. So by the time the Reformation happened in 1517, Martin Luther didn't want to leave the Catholic Church. He just wanted to reform it, hence the name Reform, the Reformation. But
And that's why they left amillennialism alone.
Yeah,
they reformed some of it, but then
he went back and he the five solas or five solas, salvation by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. I forget all the five, but those five things that the Reformation kind of people rallied around.
Sola Scriptura.
They didn't even touch prophecy or eschatology because, again, Israel wasn't back in their land. They didn't know where they were in time. And so it's a lot of things that Martin Luther got right, but he was incredibly anti-Semitic at the end of his life when he couldn't convert the Jews, right? Because Romans 11:25 talks about there being this partial blindness on them. And at the present time, they're enemies to the gospel, but what God is going to restore them at the end. So that goes through the Protestant Reformation. You have all these Protestant denominations cropping up, and they basically just kind of toe the line with amillennialism. And then eventually, 1600s, mid 50 is 1560s, 1570s, somewhere in there. So mid 16th century, there was a guy named Jesus del Alcazar. He was a Jesuit priest. So the Jesuits were like the militant arm of the Roman Catholic clergy. And they were created specifically to conduct the Counter-Reformation, to go and start dissolving
like the Spanish Inquisition.
Well, the Inquisition had been going on for centuries at that point. So it had in different countries, different places, all the way up into the 1800s, really. But the Jesuits were specifically created to be a counter-Reformation group, like a terrorism arm of the Catholic Church that would go in and destabilize Protestant churches so they would break up and come back to the Catholic faith. But in the process of that, he proposed this idea called preterism, because at the time, as these Protestant churches are now facing persecution from the Catholic Church, they're beginning to look at the Pope like the Antichrist. So that became a very popular idea that the Vatican was the beast and that the Pope was the Antichrist, et cetera, et cetera. So he's like, wait, hey, I've got this idea. Why don't we blame everything on the Romans, the pagan Romans back in the first century, and all prophecy was done then so that none of that applies to any of us today. So this idea of preterism came out. And within 100 years, that began to be adopted by certain Protestant denominations who obviously don't know their history. You have amillennialism, preterism now, and then postmillennialism starts to become a thing in the 1700s because we discovered the New World, and now we're going to send missionaries out. This is the first Great Awakening. And so this idea that the church was going to reclaim the earth for Christ kind of gets encapsulated in this idea of postmillennialism. And so that goes until the 1800s when Darby comes along, and Darby's like, he grew up a Presbyterian minister, I think, and he grew up amillennial, all that. And it was like a couple of years before this Margaret MacDonald chick. And I think he gets injured on a horse riding injury. And he just starts reading through scripture because he can't get out of his bed and stuff. He just starts noticing that God is dealing with mankind in different ways through different ages, right? And so this idea of dispensationalism, that God operates through different dispensations. Same God, he doesn't change, but how he deals with mankind at that time varies because of the conditions on the ground are different. So I make a case with my kids, right? Let's say I have 5 kids, right? And I have kids at different ages, right? I don't treat my 2-year-old, and they're not two anymore, but like at the time, I don't treat my 2-year-old the same way I treat my 6-year-old in terms of
Hmm.
like responsibilities,
Right.
punishments, expectations, all that's different. I'm the same parent, different kids, right? But they're still my kids, but I have to treat them differently because they're at different stages. So how God dealt with Adam and Eve was different than before the fall than how treated them after the fall. Same thing with the people before the flood and then after the flood, people
Hmm.
before the law and people after.
Hmm.
And so on and on. So we can see these distinct changes. So Darby didn't invent dispensationalism. He just rediscovered what was there in the same way that Martin Luther did not invent salvation by grace through faith. He simply rediscovered what the Bible
Right.
had wrong. And
Right.
so this brought him back into the premillennial mode. And to be fair, dispensationalism goes way before Darby. Obviously, it goes back to Paul and to the Bible, but like throughout church history, we found early church fathers, post-Nicene fathers, Middle Ages, in the Renaissance era, that time period. There's been people that have been always talking about how God's dealt with mankind in these different ages. And
Hmm.
so again, Darby didn't invent it. Martin Luther didn't invent salvation by grace through faith. Both men just discovered or rediscovered what was already there,
Right.
and um, that resonated. It made sense, and it was refreshing to go back to a literal grammatical, historical hermeneutic and just take
Hmm.
the Bible for what it says, unless taking it literally. You take it literally unless taking it literally makes it nonsensical. And then at
Hmm.
that point, you need to look at the surrounding passages and say, so I'm not a wooden literalist in any stretch of the imagination. When Jesus says, I am the door, I don't think he's a literal door with like hinges and a knob and made out of
Right.
wood.
Right.
I understand what he's talking about. Or when in Isaiah it talks about the rivers will sing for joy and the trees will clap their hands at the coming of the Lord or whatever. I know trees don't have hands, and I know that rivers can't sing with voices, like, but the idea is that it's poetical language, but it's also expressing a reality that nature is going to rejoice at this restoration that God brings on the earth at the end.
Hmm.
So that's where I would say that, to going back to a literal grammatical historical hermeneutic or how you interpret scripture, if you do that, you're going to walk away with some very clear, if you're honest, you're going to walk away with some very clear distinctions between the church and Israel. You're going to
Hmm.
walk away with different distinctions between the rapture event and the second coming. They are not the same thing. And as my
Hmm.
mentor used to say, things that are different are not the same. So it's kind of on the nose and it's very obvious, but I mean, apparently it's not obvious enough for a lot of people because they want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on a lot of prophecy. So they don't mind taking the rest of scripture literally, but if it's prophetic, oh man, no, we can't do that. So then
So.
they're the ones that's being inconsistent with how they interpret, and they're not being honest brokers in that.
Yeah.
Do you think was John Calvin anti-Semitic too, like Luther?
I'm sure he was. I don't know specifically I don't have any specific things that I can remember off the top of my head that he wrote but I believe he was anti-Semitic. I mean, and you got to think too, a lot of these guys are realistic in the sense that they want to share the gospel. They want to share the gospel with the Jewish people, and the Jewish people time and again are just rejecting it outright and don't want anything to do with it. And by this point, the Jews had already been through. Obviously, they've been conquered by the Romans. They've been scattered throughout the Roman Empire. They would go to a place, they would begin to flourish and thrive, and then that nation would kick them out, confiscate all their wealth, and they have to start over somewhere else. So they've been through a number of pogroms at this point. With England, with Spain, with that was up until
They've
the
been
time
kicked around a lot.
Yeah, they've been kicked out of Spain, I think, right around the time of when Christopher Columbus set sail. They've been kicked out of England in the 11 or 1200s. I'm sure they've been kicked out of other places as well. So they weren't, it wasn't easy for them, which is why they were called the Wandering Jews for
Mm.
so long. They never had a homeland.
Why do you think Reformed theology has become so popular in the latter days and, pre-trib dispensationalism? We feel like we're the minority now. Why do you think that is?
You know, Reformed theology is definitely the lazy man's eschatology or the lazy man's hermeneutic in the sense that they just want to summarize everything into two covenants, a covenant of works and a covenant of grace. So up until Adam and Eve sinned, it was a covenant of works, and after they sinned, it was grace.
Mhm.
And they just do this big, in scripture it talks about rightly dividing. Well, these guys wrongly lump everything in together. They don't they it's just a hot mess when it comes to identifying Israel, what applies to Israel, what applies to the church. And that simple lumping in of everything together has very deep impacts in terms of anti-Semitism, um, anti-Zionism, obviously eschatology. It buys back into this Augustinian amillennialism. So I don't know. I don't understand why it's become popular again, other than to say that you have young influencers or younger influencers that, well, let me back up. I know why it's systemically popular because universities, seminaries began to dismiss prophecy outright. The weirdest time of all the times that they could dismiss prophecy, somehow after Israel become a nation again, that's just become not in vogue anymore. So there's that. So the seminaries are pumping out guys that are trained in amillennialism. They just kind of I married into a Church of Christ family. They're amillennial. Their whole church is amillennial. The Churches of Christ denominations were amillennial going back to the 1940s. So I don't understand why someone would want to be reformed. I find it a very sloppy hermeneutic. Now they're good on salvation on certain aspects. They tend to be Calvinistic, which has its own problems.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't want to get into that, but like the idea that in terms of just eschatology, it's lazy. They just basically bought back in either into postmillennialism, which is not feasible, or amillennialism, which is not
Right.
or
Mhm.
biblical. So
Kelly and I really love John MacArthur, and he's pre-trib um, dispensational,
Mhm.
even though he's, Grace Church in Pasadena, California, is reformed, but all of his teaching, and he believes in Israel is Israel and the church is the church, and they are not the same.
Mhm.
So we appreciated a lot of his teaching about the end times that
yeah.
seems to line up really correctly.
Yeah, sorely missed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, we have talked your ear off, I feel like, and just scratched the surface.
Just keep talking, Pete. We could just keep talking about all this stuff. It's
We-
so much.
We've kept you well over what we said we would. So we appreciate you being willing to talk to us today.
You said you wanted to do this outline in an hour. I was like, I don't think we're going to get enough.
Well,
We're very presumptuous over here, apparently.
well,
So
we try.
we'll have to have you back on if you would be so kind. But we really do appreciate, and we're gonna link all of your YouTube and your Substack and all of the other things so people can find you. I'm sure they probably know where to find you already, but in case they don't, we'll link all of that.
Because
But
you are an excellent historian.
yeah, for sure, I've learned so much, and I'm gonna go back and re-listen so I can
Yeah.
take it all in. So
I was making notes while he was talking. I'll go back and look later.
yeah, but we really appreciate you joining us today, and thank you all for listening
To everything under the sun.